And I was just told that I asked that the lights be on so that I can read my notes. And Dan said, well, I thought it was only your hearing that was going bad, that evidently my eyesight is going bad as well. This is the first and really in a long line of public involvement sessions that we're going to be having. And the purpose here this evening is essentially to provide residents an opportunity first to understand what we're doing here in terms of code review and comprehensive plan review, and to ask questions and to make statements later on in this session. I'm here as, again, the planning director for the town. We also have Lee Einsweiler, who is over here, this gentleman. And Lee is a principal in a firm called Code Studio. Lee has worked with the town before, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my conclusion here. But Lee is going to be actually providing a more in-depth description of what this whole process is going to be about. And I'm at a loss here because I can't see that screen over there. It's not, so I'm going to fumble along here. So the way we're going to do this is my brief introductory comments, and I'll speak a little bit about the project organization, and the majority of the time this evening is going to be devoted to the project overview and the project schedule. And I'll see you that both that schedule and the overview of the work technology, for lack of a better term, is going to be very rigorous. I'd ask that when we get to the comment and question period, and I know that's not going to be a problem tonight because we don't have a full room here, but if you let us know who you are, and that you make your comments as brief as possible and try not to be repetitive, but there's going to be no limit on terms of the actual time that you get to speak. Now that's primarily because we have so few people here this evening. This is a very abbreviated workflow diagram. And if any of you, and there's some familiar faces here, that if any of you have been here through the original comprehensive plan development process, you see that there's a lot of similarities between this and what we did back in the early 2000s in terms of the work technology here. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the comprehensive plan in a very targeted way at some very specific components of our community growth. We're going to be looking at the comprehensive plan for making some policy changes and policy guidance for what we'll be doing in terms of developing code language. Let me take a moment to describe essentially what they are. First of all, there's going to be a comprehensive review of the zoning code. Lee's going to be doing that, and it's really intended to go through that code and say, here are the strengths and here are the weaknesses. Here are some new components that can be added to the code. So that's kind of almost a diagnostic kind of activity, and that's really one of the primary things we'll be doing. But one of the areas of focus is going to be on our commercial areas. If you take a look at our comprehensive plan, you'll see that the commercial areas are basically shown as the red color area, and primarily in some of the major corridors in the town. If you look at the zoning code, it kind of reflects that. But when you go out in the field and you experience it on a day-to-day basis, you're going to find that some of those areas are really about neighborhoods, and they serve neighborhoods. Some are more community-oriented, and then we have some very, very good, very thriving regional commercial areas. There's no relationship whatsoever between those functional elements of the commercial and the zoning code itself, and we intend to rectify that situation. And finally, and the one that I'm most excited about is employing some new techniques. Now, they're not new throughout the country, and I think that Lee will address that, but they'll be new to the town of Amherst. And that's form-based coding. We've had some situations where we'd really like to fit some redevelopment opportunities into the existing fabric of the edges of neighborhoods, and we really have not had the tools to be able to do that. And a sort of a subcomponent of that is some design criteria or ways of guiding the actual design of how those redevelopment projects look. So those are the three components that we're going to be dealing with. We are not going to be doing a comprehensive review of the plan. It's not going to be a totally changed plan. We're going to focus on those three major areas, and the coding would also be focused on those as well. We are in the early phases here of the planning process. Let's call it project initiation. Lee has been spending a great deal of time speaking with stakeholders here, community groups, design professionals, and what have you. He had a session this afternoon that was very productive, I understand, and getting a sense of what the residents of the community see as being the issues. He's going to go back to his home office, and he's going to process all that information. He's going to take a look at the existing code. He's going to look at the existing comprehensive plan and do an analysis. From that analysis, he'll be working with us to come up with some recommendations for changes in the comprehensive plan itself. Now, when I say changes, I really am looking for those to be more improvements, additions to, more definition on the plan, and that's what we'll be seeing as that first work product. Getting that work product and having that work product accepted by the community is something which is critical, because that provides the policy background for changes to the zoning code. Let me take a moment here to say, okay, what happens then? I think I mentioned early on that there's going to be a working committee, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That working committee is actually a subcommittee of the planning board. The planning board has blanket authority in this particular case for maintaining the comprehensive plan and recommending changes to the zoning code. They have an obligation to have public hearings on those recommendations, and that'll happen later on in this process. But in the final analysis, it's the town board that's responsible for considering and hopefully adopting these changes, both to the comprehensive plan and to the zoning code. And they also, under state law, have an obligation for holding a public hearing. But I said that before, the last box, because the last box is really all about education, educating both those who will be administering the code and using the comprehensive plan here in Town Hall and elsewhere throughout the town of Amherst. And also we have an opportunity and actually an obligation to educate some of the regional officials that are out there and other communities around us. This is probably a good time to let you know that this whole process is being heavily funded by the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which is NYSERDA. They're funding approximately 75% of the cost of doing this work. So that's really the workflow. As part of that overall, I'll call it scope of work here, we are going to be constituting two committees. One is a working committee, and the second one is going to be a technical advisory committee. First of all, the project working committee, it's a contractual requirement. We actually have a contract with NYSERDA, and we have to meet the requirements of that contract in order to be reimbursed for our costs. And it's a contractual requirement that we have a committee like this. It's the responsibility of the chairman of the planning board to make appointments to that committee. And let me go to the proper slide here. Their overall responsibility is to basically guide the plan and guide the drafting of the code amendments. And again, after that's done, we'll be going through the adoption process. The committee that I will be working probably most closely with, because I'm going to chair that committee, is a technical advisory committee. And that committee is composed of technical staff, Gary Black, who's the assistant planning director, is going to be a key member of that. We'll have members of the building department. They administer the zoning code. And there's also going to be representatives of regional agencies. You say, well, why regional agencies? This is the town of Amherst. First of all, the Erie County Department of Environment and Planning has an opportunity, actually a responsibility for reviewing any proposed changes to comprehensive plan and zoning codes that affect certain areas in the town, and that's going to be a given here with this particular project. So, and we always had a very good working relationship with them, so they will be a member of this committee. In addition, the University at Buffalo Regional, Gary helped me out with the last word, Regional Institute, they will be part of this, as well as the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council. Now, They're involved primarily because one of the major aspects of this work is going to be that we address sustainability issues. Sustainability issues are something which is key in the state of New York and all over the country. We can go into a little more of that when Lee makes his presentation. But addressing sustainability issues in the community are also part of our responsibility under our contract with NYSERDA. What I'm going to do now is, I think I've given you this brief overview. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce Lee Einsweiler to you. As I mentioned before, Lee has worked with the town before. The code we have right now and the improvements that we made in 2006 are largely the responsibility of his technical expertise. They have served us well since 2006, and we look forward to the amendments that will come out of this whole process will serve us equally as well. Lee?
Thank you, Rick. Luckily, I've gotten a lot smarter in the last 10 years, so we're going to do a better job this time around. Yes. So, good evening. My name is Lee Einsweiler. I have here in the auditorium two other members of my team, Colin Scarf, who's taking photos for Prosperity, and Annette Herman, who works with Home Run Creative and has helped us prepare the website and is going to continue to help us with the public outreach in this project. Just want to recognize them briefly before we begin. I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about our firm's experience, in case you don't know anything about our firm, introduce our team overall, the project work plan and schedule, talk a little bit about where the opportunities for public outreach will lie, and finally I'm going to leave you with a little bit of food for thought. Nothing that needs to be answered tonight necessarily, just how are we going to think about this project as we move forward? So one of the points that we like to make about our firm, really when Colin and I founded the firm, which is almost exactly 10 years ago, our real desire was to focus on walkable places, on the kinds of places that people enjoy spending time, the places that we like to live and work and play. And our key interest is in plans which are actually implemented, not just set up on the shelf. We have worked on a number of visionary plans across the country. These are not plans we created, but we went and followed on and created the codes that came behind these plans. In both Raleigh and Denver are these examples. Forward Dallas, Plan Cincinnati, we've actually been responsible for a number of efforts that follow planning efforts. But we do our best job when we actually plan and design at the same time moving forward with the coding. This is how we get the tightest relationship between the planning thinking, which might happen on one side of my brain, and the coding thinking, which probably happens on the other side if we ask the engineers. But in fact, these kinds of planning and designing exercises are the best possible way to get the best possible zoning, because they're place specific. They are worked on in the place. They are looked at on the ground. They engage the community and really offer us an opportunity to do our very best work. We believe that we successfully educate and facilitate these kinds of projects. We've been doing it for a long time. We hope we know how to talk about these things, how to bring them home to people who are not planning wonks and zoning wonks, but rather live in the real world. I like to suggest that we need to be able to talk about these things with someone you sat down next to on the bus bench. And if we can achieve that, then we're doing a good job. We also believe that we prepare some of the most user-friendly and elegant documents in the industry. I think that the end result will be much more satisfying than today's code. It'll broadcast the town's intent. It'll show more creatively how things are measured, how things are thought about in the code, so that it won't be so difficult to move out of that lawyer mindset, which today's code is really written in raw text for lawyers, to a mindset that is more for the designers, the architects, the landscape architects, and others who work on the projects. How do we help inspire them to build the right thing in the town? Our experience is pretty widespread. In fact, I'm getting old enough now where there's almost nobody with more nationwide experience than our firm. Over 50 codes in the last while. We are currently working, we're halfway through a project to replace Los Angeles's code, the biggest code project that's ever been let in the country, and part of the pride of our fleet, if you will. But we've also worked in a wide variety of other places at large and small scale. As I say, the pieces on the bottom, the small area codes, are often the pieces that we're the most excited to show to people because they are the most tightly coded to the places that they were created for. And we're glad to have you call any of our references, have a look on our website, poke around a little bit, just check out how people feel about the work that we've done. We're quite comfortable having you have a look at our project history. Just to introduce our team, I mentioned these members before that are in the room. The one missing team member is Urban Design Associates. When we actually get down to testing out some of our code concepts, we're going to bring some designers to town who are renowned on the national design front as being especially context sensitive, very capable of great design of these kinds of centers. And so we'll bring some of the members of Urban Design Associates to complement the planners and others as part of our code team. And throughout the project, Home Run Creative will be helping us make sure that we are attached to the community at the hip to the extent we can be. The key deliverables for this project, and you heard Rick talk about these a little earlier, include technical amendments to the zoning, right? Some things that we probably should have done a long time ago and we just haven't gotten around to it. There's probably a Post-it hanging out of somebody's code somewhere that says, wow, rewrite this paragraph, wow, this is really hard to understand. Or, ooh, this conflicts with section blah, 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 blah. Those are the kinds of things we'll be looking at in those technical amendments. It also gives us a chance to reformat the code, shift the organization a little bit to make it more user-friendly, and make a beautiful PDF that'll be clickable and linked, unlike the general code version of the code right now. The comprehensive plan amendment, some recommendation that we work through with the community and bring forward about the proposed centers and corridors, a text amendment for the plan, and a map of how to categorize those centers. Whether we have one flavor, 3 flavors, 6 flavors is uncertain at this point. But in some sense, we're going to take the little stars that are on the plan map right now, and they're all the same color, and they all just say Mixed Use Activity Center, and categorize those as something that we can then move forward and prepare the next portion of the deliverables, a zoning ordinance amendment that actually includes new rules for those places, and including a map that would apply those new rules. So by the time we get done, you're going to see classification of the centers, new rules for those centers, and exactly where those new rules would apply. So that's where we're headed. Remind you once again, the amendments will, in the end, be reviewed by the planning board and the town board. And while that is the most important step, I would say your early involvement is actually the most useful. It's when the project is the most malleable. Right now, we've got no sense of where these things are headed, some vague sense of what the community might want, some vague sense of what developers might want, what the town might want. All of those parties have to be engaged in this process. And we'll come to, we hope, a shared consensus about the plan amendment first, and then work on the zoning ordinance amendments that will back that up. So the steps of our work plan, we're starting out with this project initiation step. We've had a series of site tours. We did the south part of town yesterday, and today got a chance to see most of the centers in the northern part of the town. We've held a series of stakeholder sessions in which we're really just listening to find out how people feel about these centers, how they feel about the zoning today, and we've gotten an earful from every direction. So there's plenty for us to think about. We've met with our working committee last evening. We met the first time with our working committee. Our chair is here tonight. And tonight we're doing our public briefing. We do have a couple more stakeholder sessions and a debrief tomorrow, and then it's back off to Austin, Texas. The next step for us is really some in the office analysis. This critique of the existing regulations, including any of the issues that staff has flagged over the years as needing clarification. The review of the existing comprehensive plan and how it describes the centers, how it talks about these things. And my sense of that is that when we open that up, we're going to find one size fits all. Centers are centers. Eggertsville and Snyder are treated in the comprehensive plan today pretty much the same as many of the other centers in town would be. Maybe they shouldn't be in the future. This is our chance to think about that a little bit. Review the existing commercial centers. Have a look at the aerial photos, the site photos we took. Start to get a sense of what is it that's making these centers look different. What are the physical characteristics? What are the uses in these places? How do they differ one from the other? We'll work on an organization and a proposed outline for the new code, and that package of materials will come forward. We're headed for the town board. We're headed for the town board because I don't want to have to draft these proposed things 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times. We don't have enough money in the contract to do that. We'd like to do it once, and we'd like to do it right. So what we'd like to do is visit with the town board and confirm that we're headed in the right direction based on our analysis. So this would be a good chance for the community to be involved. You'll get a chance to look at all of that analysis and see whether you agree with us. Are we on the right track? Are we headed the right direction? And you'll be able to speak to the town board and help them understand whether you feel we're on the right track. So that will be a great opportunity for public input. Once the town board has opined that we're headed the right direction, or we're headed the right direction, but you need to do this a little different, or whatever they share with us, we'll be ready to begin developing the plan concepts. And so the first step there really is for us to prepare a report that categorizes all of the centers somehow. These ones are the same as these ones and can be treated with this kind of rules. This one is a very different thing and needs this kind of rules instead. So we'll do an initial cut at that and prepare this activity center report, followed then by a public participation exercise in which we test that with the entire community, in which we ask the community, do we have these centers categorized right? And if we use these kinds of rules, we're actually going to test some little block studies, some little site planning exercises to see what that would build on the ground. And we're going to share those with the public and be able to say, well, okay, if this came in your neighborhood or adjacent to your neighborhood or across town in the place where you work, if this came, would you be comfortable with it? Is this the right direction? Is this where we should be headed? So all of that would occur during that preparation of the fundamental principles of the plan amendment. We'll collect that together and actually draft the plan amendment. In the next step, we'll draft a map of where we propose these ideas apply. That map would be added to the comprehensive plan and be a refinement of the current map, which just has the black stars all over. And we would move that through staff and committee review to get to the point where we think we have something ready for the public to chew on. We would also at the same time be working on the draft zoning amendment, reorganizing, reformatting, and illustrating the existing provisions and improving the code document that exists today, making those modest technical revisions identified and agreed upon in the first phase, but then also preparing new zoning for the centers and corridors. The new zoning clearly would subject to a legal review to make sure that we're on the right track from the legal perspective. And then at that point, we'll have an adoption-ready plan amendment and zoning amendment. And those will be ready to go forward into the traditional process of hearings. In the meantime, we will have talked with the community about each of those pieces before we put it into that pipeline. So we'll get a chance to meet with you at that stage as well. And as Rick mentioned earlier, then not only was there an adoption phase, but during that phase, because we've got to be here, for example, for an evening meeting, we have an opportunity to train people on the code during the day. So we'll invite in for a half day all the design professionals, perhaps, the architects, the landscape architects, and others who are likely to use this code and submit plans. We'll work with the building staff and planning staff who review these plans, make sure they understand how the code works. So give us a great head start on implementation of the new regulations under the presumption that the town board would approve them. We are also going to hold a community forum. One of the obligations of our NYSERDA grant is a little bit of knowledge transfer to other communities. So we'll be spending a little time sharing with them sort of lessons learned as well as our outcomes and our products. You know, how could this be done better if your community is going to do this same steps next? How could you tackle the job even better than we did? So we'll be talking about that in that community forum. So when we look at the timing for this, overall, our contractual timing is really about 14 months to get to the point where we have the draft plan and amendment ready to go into the adoption pipeline. But of course, we all know that the adoption phase is really determined by the planning board and the town board as they do their review. So that will take what it takes. It'll be as big and broad a community discussion as the town board feels is necessary. If that takes a couple of months, if that takes a longer period, they'll have every opportunity to set the timeline for that portion of the project. So this is one of my favorite challenges, is the minute we talk about zoning, we're talking about people's livelihood. Whether it's your home or your business or you're in the business of building things, changes to zoning can generate mass hysteria. How do we make sure that we calmly consider what we're doing here? How do we make sure that we have a rational, reasonable conversation about what the community centers can be over time? Well, part of that is we have to be prepared. We have to engage with the community. We have to educate ourselves about the place. We have to educate the community about what we've learned from other places. We have to work on our transparency. We have to make sure that you are seeing the same things that we're seeing. If we're crafting a document for our working committee, it's posted on the web so that you guys can review it as well and comment if you feel like. We need to make sure that there's a sense of immediacy. There are reasons to make these changes. There are requests coming in every day for additional development. Let's make sure that we do our job in a timely fashion. We have to be collaborative. And we have to actually empower those who are involved in the project to make those decisions. This cannot be the plan amendment that guy from Texas did. This cannot be that dang zoning that guy from Texas did, right? That's not helpful. We're here to serve as an extension of the staff, to help work with the community, to help work with everyone here to keep from generating mass hysteria as we talk about this. So how do we do that? Well, we have a number of methods that we found successful in other communities. May well be these need to be tweaked here in Amherst to make them work more effectively. But fundamentally, we have a series of primary tools and secondary tools that we like to use. Primary outreach is really our face-to-face time. So things like those listening sessions, the focus groups, public briefings, workshops, open houses, all of that is face time for us with the community. Our biggest piece of that, of course, will be the preparation and engagement that happens during that public participation design charrette. As secondary tools, we encourage people who can't come to those face-to-face kinds of things to follow on by following our project website. This is a website that we'll be posting material to throughout the project. It's called imagineamherst.com. It's up already. Not a whole lot of material to look at yet because we're just getting started. But as we provide things like the meeting notes from our meetings we've had and the PowerPoint from this show will go up there. Each of the things that are generated for public consumption will be found there throughout the course of the project, so that you can come in 6 months from now if you weren't engaged and you can find out the history and follow along with how the project has moved forward. In addition, we'll use social media like Facebook and Twitter, mostly to keep people involved and engaged as a way to comment and talk about the project, but also as a way for us to push you to go look at the website again when we've got a new document up, right? Check this out, it's been posted, or please come see us, we're coming back to town, and please come to this meeting. Those are the kinds of things you'll see on those social media pieces. We'll also use direct mail and e-blast, newsletters. The town will have speakers available upon request, so that if a neighborhood group wants to hear what is this project really all about, they could ask the town and someone would come out and make themselves available to speak. So there'll be every opportunity to do that. And then for those who are not part of the digital generation, hard copies of our documents and things will be available at Northtown Plaza, at Town Hall, and at the various libraries. We have to think about a series of audiences in this project, though. We have an internal audience, right? The folks we actually are working for and with, which happens to be the staff, the working committee, and the elected appointed officials. Then we have our external audiences, property owners, business interests, developers, design professionals, and of course, the neighborhood groups. I apologize I've left those off of here, but they are one of our external audiences. And of course, the media themselves pass the word on down through the system. Tonight we were blessed by the presence of Channel 7 for a little bit, so hopefully there'll be a little blurb out there and people will hear a little bit more about this project. So I want to share with you just a little bit of food for thought. As I said, these are not questions we expect to answer tonight, nor do we necessarily expect to answer them in the next couple of weeks. It'll be during the months and over the course of this project that we'll really have the answers to these questions. But just as food for thought, some questions to ponder. In thinking about new zoning, new rules that applies to development in commercial places, are existing development patterns worth perpetuating? Do we like what we've been getting, right? If we like what we've been getting, then we can think about regulating in a different way than if we want to transform what we've been seeing. So if we were looking at a site in the village that was, instead of being walkable, was very auto-oriented, if somehow something had slipped in and we had a downtown car dealer, with a massive site with cars all over and whatever, I don't think we would think it was in keeping or in character, and we'd want to transform that area, right? It's not a real-life example. We're not really working in the village. We're only doing the town. But just as an example, there's an extreme between that walkable village feeling and a huge car dealership, right? Incompatible. So how can we think about those? Do we have plans to transform some of these existing sites and areas? Are we rethinking Northtown? Are we rethinking some of the office areas in town? Not quite certain. What does the market want to produce? I think if we were listening with our ear to the ground right now, all we would hear is hotel, 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 hotel. That's what's happening in town right now, along with senior living, perhaps, a few other things. But for the most part, the market is driven by what it can finance right now, and those are things that the marketplace is capable of doing right this minute. What is the community vision in regard to the quality of development and its scale and mass? And then the real tough question is, can we accommodate the market within the community vision? Are these things in alignment or not? And some of the recent activity here might suggest they're kind of out of alignment. The market is driving things that perhaps the community is not ready to place in its vision. So let's do a better job with the vision and the tools that implement the vision. Try to get a little closer to that in the future. Are we regulating the right things? In many cases, a community that has not expressed its urban design intentions will get formulaic answers. If, you've already got a Panera Bread and you've got a Starbucks and you've got one of each around here, right? So the first plan those guys bring to town is their cheapest plan, typically, right? They bring their C quality plan to your community, and then you beat them up for a little while and it goes to B or A, depending on how good you are at beating up those formula kinds of site plans. That is a pattern we see across the country. So if you're not expressing your urban design intent to these places at first, you get a site plan that is fundamentally unacceptable. So where you have rules, as you do today, which treat all of your centers fairly equally, you're going to get the wrong answers in certain places, because clearly all of those centers are not the same things. Neighborhood compatibility and transitions, clearly an issue in this community, where you have, in many cases, such shallow sites and single family right next door, right over the fence line. We've got to start thinking a little harder about how to make those transitions. Other communities do a better job than what we've seen on the ground here during our visit in the tours. Are we enhancing sites at the right time? One of the biggest challenges is if I have a place that's sitting a little bit dormant, and I have somebody who wants to bring a use in and they need to pave a few more parking spaces. Am I going to ask them to bring the whole parking lot up to code and the lighting and the landscaping just because they needed 5 more parking spaces? Or are there some balancing kinds of things we can do in the interest of redevelopment that somehow don't trigger things quite so quickly? Now, if you're doing full new construction, you're tearing everything down on a site, we're going to apply the full rule book to you. But in other cases where you're making modest improvements to the site, what should be the level of obligations? And especially sometimes drainage and other kinds of things can be extremely costly and can actually kill off a project that you might have liked. So we'll have to talk about how to balance the need for triggering new rules that are in place with existing projects. A little bit more food for thought. We've already talked about the fact we're going to reformat and reorganize and illustrate the code, that we're going to work on these mixed-use activity centers. We've talked about these transitions, but really what we're going to be talking about, I think, most heavily during the public participation phase is the idea of code testing in some target areas. We've really got to look at what could be built under new rules, what could come, and then we have to show that to you and test that out. Because right now, this is a community that is used to an ad hoc process in which the developer comes forward and his case is reviewed, and they kind of drive the conversation. We need to actually be bringing some options forward to you about what could come on those same sites, perhaps, and talk about them a little bit so that we can test our code and see if we've got the right kinds of rules and the right kinds of places being developed. So here's some of your current centers. The Hopkins Dodge Plaza, Eggertsville, University Place, and Northtown Plaza. The letters after them represent the zoning that's been applied to them today. In many cases, the same zoning, GB, for example, although in Eggertsville it's got a special overlay over the top. But I don't think anybody could look at those photos and say these were the same kinds of places, right? So we already know there's different flavors of places here, of commercial areas, of mixed-use areas, and they need different rule sets. So when we think about that, we got to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Zoning deals with use, and it deals with form. These are 2 key things it does: height, bulk, mass, scale, and the uses in the building. Those are the kinds of things that zoning has regulated since 1916 when New York City did the first one. Are the existing uses in this area acceptable? Do we want to continue them? That's one of the fundamental questions. So, for example, when we were talking with representatives from the development community, one of the developers has a lot of office space in town, and it's only allowed to be office today. It's really not allowed to have other things there. Well, if you have just a big chunk of office, what are you going to get? You're going to get a bunch of trips in the morning. You're going to get a trip out for lunch, maybe, if they don't have a good cafeteria, and back in after lunch, and you're going to get a trip home at night. So we're going to generate all of those trips and all of that activity on the adjacent roadway system when everybody else is trying to use it. When in fact, if we had a better balance between things, perhaps we had a place for you to have lunch. Perhaps there was a blueprint shop to serve the architects who are there, a copy shop. Perhaps if there were some small kinds of things, dry cleaners that could take care of your suit for you in the morning. Are these ideas that whose time may have come in this community? Are we ready to think again about these uses and whether there should be more uses in that particular area or not? Or perhaps less uses in some areas? Are the existing development patterns desirable? So if both the uses and the development pattern that exist today are desirable, it's really easy to code for. We code for the same thing. We put rules in place that have the same metrics as the stuff out there now, right? Same kinds of heights, same setback related to the street, same building massing, same parking location on the site. All of those become relatively straightforward. On the other hand, if we do not like the uses or we do not like the development pattern, we have to rethink those areas. What are we going to transform them into? Because again, we'll be writing the rules for that transformation, the roadmap for the development community to follow, and the neighbors to be comfortable they know what is coming, right? So code for those planned future uses and patterns, and think very hard. Many cases today, we don't have enough money to just wipe the whole thing out and replace it whole hog. An example of this that's coming up right now is the Northtown Center, where they seem to be emptying out one portion of the center right now in advance of replacing that portion, right? There's going to be something new come to that site. What should the rules be? And how can we make sure that that phased development is easy so that we can continue to get improvements in these centers over time, and they don't have to deteriorate to the point where we just have to push them down with a bulldozer, right? So how do we deal with that? Finally, I think it's important for you to know what kind of detail do we need when we're talking about planning for these places. And so here are some of the kinds of things that we need to know in order to be able to write good zoning for those places. We need to know about the streets and blocks. Streets, the sidewalks, the streetscapes, the block lengths. In a downtown, you use smaller blocks. In a large industrial area or an office park, you use larger blocks. What are we thinking in terms of these pieces? Land uses. What are our key retail streets or our transit streets? And how does land use relate to the capacity of adjacent roadways? How do these things get matched up? Areas that might have special treatments because they are particular in character. They have access to water, or they have views, or they have something else that other places don't have. Building height, perhaps in stories, perhaps not just this feet number that we've been dealing with for so long here, and especially neighborhood height transitions. How are we going to deal with those in particular areas, in specific locations in town? How are we going to figure those out? And can't we do that generically by looking at a series of sites in advance and provide answers in advance of the developer coming and negotiating his custom deal? Building and parking placement. So the locations, are they pulled up to the street? Or because this is a really busy road and there'll never be any parking on it or anything else, are we comfortable setting the building back a little bit? And when we set it back, do we actually just want green space between the building and the street? Or do we set it far enough back that parking between the building and the street is allowed? There's a variety of different patterns, and we might accommodate all of them in different parts of the community. The actual location of parking, does it have to be only to the rear, as in a Main Street example? Can it be to the side? Can some show up in front, in between the building and the street? All of these are questions that we'll need to answer about each of these character areas that we might decide on, right? So this is Eggertsville and Snyder. You never park between the building and the street. You can park on the street, but the building's pulled up and the parking's behind. It's the traditional pattern in those areas. It seems as though perhaps it should be followed in the future. So we're talking to the community about that. I just want to close with one idea, and this is some examples from Denver, which was a code that we did about 5 years ago. So there are already some of what I would consider some very successful outcomes. This is Colfax Avenue, both of these instances. This is a sort of a main street. It runs east-west through Denver, through the entire community, from one end to the other, through the whole city. So think of it perhaps a little bit like Main Street. These are, on the top left, you'll see there an Office Depot, or was it a Staples? I'm not quite sure, but an office supply store. It's actually located in an old grocery store. I know that only because that waveform roof was the signature for a grocery store way back when. But that business is located perpendicular to the Main Street. So really what you see at the Main Street edge is this big empty parking lot. This is what you feel as you walk up and down the street. This is where if you get off the bus here, if you pull your car in, the first thing you're really aware of is this giant parking lot. When the new zoning was in place on this site, the owner themselves, without being required to, built themselves a new store on their own site. And they built it according to the new rules. They pulled it up to the street, as you can see here on the lower photo, but they couldn't meet all of the rules for how much glazing and windows and doors needed to be along the street to make it feel active. They couldn't meet that rule, so you'll see that little wall that sticks up through the roof and a little piece in the corner of the building. This is a tiny little business, happens to be a hot dog place, near and dear to your hearts here as well. A very successful hot dog place tucked itself in the corner of the building, and voila, we have a huge big box sitting on Main Street in a very comfortable way with windows and doors, with activity right along the street. A very successful answer. The other example is here on the right. This one's a liquor store. And so you'll see it in the back of the image, large tilt-up concrete liquor store from the days when we were building buildings that looked a little bit like fortresses, and a huge sign for it, including a billboard. And they built their new building out to the street. You'll see it here in the lower picture. It's pulled out to the corner to hold the corner. And actually, the liquor store does not take up the whole space now because there's 2 stories. And so it's actually an additional use in the upper story. The good thing about this story is it didn't take the outside guy to get the job done. These are existing businesses that rebuilt, reinvested, reinvented themselves on their own sites just because the new rules enabled them to do so. So what we're talking about with this new zoning is not necessarily a thing that sends all of the character of Amherst away to exist somewhere else because we've wiped it all out and we put something from somewhere else in its place. This can be a character-enhancing thing for businesses that are here already in the community and are interested in reinvesting and thriving in Amherst over time. So I offer you up that success story as a final example of what we might aspire to achieve with the new zoning. People investing their own money in their own sites to upgrade and meet the town's shared vision. This is where we should expect to go. So thank you very much for coming, and Rick is going to help manage the process of public comment. If anyone would like to comment, if you'd come up here to the front, that would be great. We're going to turn the lights back on so you don't stumble in the dark.
As I did. Thank you. As you can see, this is a very, very extensive project with a great deal of opportunity to become involved. And tonight is probably one of the first opportunities you're going to have to do that. I ask that if you have any comments or questions, you come up to the podium. I'm going to warn you a little bit that this is being recorded, both video and in terms of the audio. Much of this material that we get will show up on the website as well. So what I'd like you to do, if you have a comment or any questions, come up, identify yourself. We'll do our very best to answer whatever questions you have, and of course all of your comments will be recorded.
Quick question before we start. Is it a 3-minute time limit, or is it open-ended?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is there a 3-minute time limit to these questions? That I can
With
speak?
the small group that we have here this evening, I don't think we'll put a time limit on it, but I would ask you to be as brief as possible and not to be repetitive.
Well, I'll try not to be repetitive. You do too.
All right?
Okay. Good evening. My name is Don Smith. Mr. Einsweiler, I must say you did a great job at presenting the concepts of zoning and probably even going into a little bit of the forum-based zoning, and I would comment that you did a good job. I think you're probably, you and your group are probably very good at what you do, especially since you focus on what your job is, which is zoning information. You may or may not be familiar with the recent events that have occurred here at the last town board meeting during public expression. If you have, it's good that you have been. There were a certain number of people who expressed problems with the way the project has been started and carried to date. And you should be aware of that. I think I'll do a little review on that just so as you understand where I'm going toward. The original NYSERDA grant resolution did not carry the contract with it at all, 69 pages. And then the Code Studio contract resolution did not carry that with it, although the resolution stated that they did. You had to dig for them, which is not very good when you're trying to be open. I must thank Gary Black. He did a great job. I asked him for them. He gave them, and I'm looking through them right now. And I find some interesting things in both of those contracts. I think the weakness I see in what I've seen so far in the work that you and your group are doing and the town is in the public outreach section of what you're doing. I think, like anything else, I was a software engineer for lots of years, getting to eventually to become a principal software engineer. And I've worked for many different situations, and I would go into the concept of user-friendly, but I don't think I want to get into that. I don't want to get down and dig into deeps with technology right now. I want to get with concepts. I think the public outreach is the problem. One of the aspects that was contentious at the last town board meeting was the way the project working committee was formulated, put together, the transparency in what was presented to the public and the public knowledge of how that committee was assigned. It seemed to be given to us, thrust on the community, with no comment or no possibility for the community to give any feedback on that. For a public outreach portion of your project, I think that's a problem. Secondarily, I think you as technical people involved in the concepts of zoning, and you did a very detailed description. I was at the meeting last night. I asked you a question about recording the information, as you probably remember. And I can see where maybe one weakness that your company has and the other company has is in the public outreach portion of the thing. And there's many different ways public outreach can be done. There's no simple way of doing it. There's proactive, there's reactive, there's combinations thereof, there's push-pull. There's lots of ways of doing that. I have some really bones to pick with you with the concept of user-friendly. Given that I was in software all my years, that's something I have very good idea about. So I think you should, at least at one point, reevaluate and look at your public or outreach information you've been provided from your sources, and then look for other people's comments and ideas on how to improve that, specifically improve that. Because I think that's the weakest point of the program as I see so far. I understand that the design of the project is on mixed-use corridors and centers. I like to find out exactly what the definition of a center really is. I'm also interested in the concept of what's called the edge issues that you're talking about, because I think the devil is in the details on the edge issues. I think that's where the problems are going to occur most often the time, and that's where hysteria comes from, and is mostly in the edges. I also want to say that your picture of the Northtown Center was old. The company was there, has been all raised down. The Whole Foods is there now. So, and I understand what the Northtown Center was.
My last visit.
Yeah, I know. And it's been down. Whole Foods is there now. They tore that whole big building down. It went through many iterations of users, and it's a huge store, and it was really not making a profit. So I worked at the Northtown Center when I was going to college, going to engineering school and all that good stuff. So public outreach, I think, is going to be the Achilles heel of this particular project. I specifically think the problem here is going to be in the process of getting the community to accept that this is a fair project, that you are doing the proper amount of information for people on the outside. I have had a chance to go through and look through the Code Studio contract now and the NYSERDA contract. And will there be an opportunity for the public to see from the NYSERDA contract, section 1, I have to get this right, the project benefits metrics report, draft project? Will we be able to see that particular report? That seems to answer some of the questions that people were asking at that meeting, at the town board meeting. Thank you very much for listening to me.
let me respond in at least one way on the public outreach. We're in the process now of reviewing a public outreach plan, and when that plan is finalized, that it will then be on the website, and we'd certainly encourage comments on that when it comes out. I think that Lee provided the very basics of what we're going to do there, but there'll be more detail on that. We, as I said early on, this is going to be a very, very robust citizen participation element to this plan. We've employed one of the finest firms in the area, actually as a sub-consultant to Code Studio, to assist with that, and we're going to be trying some very new techniques that was never been tried before in terms of the way we do planning and seek community input to that planning activity.
My name is Kathy Aquilina. My first question is, are any of the public meetings going to be held at night? Because I know the stakeholder meeting was held, in the afternoon when people were working and couldn't make it. So our public hearings going to be held at night?
Yes.
Okay, all of them? Okay. Now, one thing said hard copy is going to be...
Let me be perfectly clear. Some of the sessions, the charrette sessions that will be held in the early fall of this year, those will be during the day because they'll be highly interactive and rather lengthy. But there will be opportunities to understand what went on there, to get feedback, and to provide opportunities for comment on that made available to you, and then there will be a lot of activities that will be held in the evening as well. We understand that residents of this town, most of us have jobs, and that we still want to participate, and we're going to provide every opportunity for you to do that.
Okay. Now, on the one slide, it said hard copies will be available at Northtown Plaza. Where?
Yeah, I believe that those...
That'll be corrected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not going to be the plaza.
Well,
Yeah.
kind of a
I-
partial plaza.
They'll be here at Town Hall and the library, as they usually are.
Yeah. And I think in that particular slide, there was a Scrivener's error there, and it was really referring to Northtown Center. And I would anticipate that that's one of the options where we may have some citizen participation activities. But I think the thing to do is to continue to log into the website. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the primary portal for you to receive information, both in terms of what the activities are going to be and information in terms of what's being produced. The actual products will be there as well. And that's going to give you your very best venue for providing input, for, number one, understanding and providing input.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeff Ampleman. I'm a recent implant to the town. I spent most of my life in the city of Buffalo and have been really involved in the green code process to date. Yeah. You mentioned the idea of form-based code versus a general use code, and the ideas of massing and scale and character and materials aren't well understood by the general person relative to just uses. So I think as early in the process as possible, it's really important to educate people on those differences. Because I think you'll find you'll get a more fruitful public process moving forward. Parts of Amherst have a lot of character that should be preserved, but other parts of it don't have any. And then the question becomes, what do we want that character to become? So people that are more educated in those issues, I think, will be, they'll provide better public input.
Yeah. First of all, I couldn't agree with you more. I think education is a key part of this. And the other thing is, I think that which we haven't clearly articulated here is that we don't see this as being a pure exercise to make our code form-based. We really refer to it as a hybrid code. We think that most of the residential areas are perfectly fine, and a Euclidean type of coding can be maintained there and work extremely well. But I think in some of the areas where the commercial zoning exists, and particularly those areas where we're going to be fitting redevelopment projects, reinvestment projects into the existing fabric, that's where we're going to be using the form-based code. It will be vastly different than the form-based code in the city of Buffalo, the green code. But certainly there will be some elements of that which we're going to incorporate into what we do going forward.
My name is Thomas Frank, and I'd like to, on the education issue, I would like to recommend John W. Percy's book on the geography and history of Western New York. It's highly recommended. It should be required reading for all of the elected officials as far as the history of the village of Williamsville and the town of Amherst that you have. Really, it was a great meeting we had last night. As far as the village, as far as the Congress of New Urbanism, as far as the Picture Main Street, One Region Forward project, that what we're doing here is going to be a demonstration project for the state of New York. And as far as the, as far as the planning, as far as the land use planning, that you have to have an historical perspective. I've got a photograph here of the suburban houses in the Ellicott Creek watershed that are underwater. That as far as measures, zoning measures to mitigate, that you don't allow the development of floodplain areas. And it's interesting how the United States Army, the Corps of Engineers, is doing the contract work for Tonawanda Creek for the FEMA to prevent flooding and destruction. A part of this project should be to include Ellicott Creek, because Ellicott Creek is a part of the Erie Canal National Heritage Area, and the entire, it's the main artery in the town of Amherst, that the built environment, and as far as all the infrastructure that supports the built environment, as far as the maintenance, should be a part of this, as far as a long-term, as far as, and looking specifically at the plans for the mitigation of the traffic, as far as the governor at the State of the State address a couple of weeks ago said that the revenues from the Williamsville toll barrier are no longer going to go for the maintenance of the Tonawanda Creek on the Erie Canal, that it's going to come from the relicensing of the Niagara Power Project. Now, Ellicott Creek is a tributary of the Niagara. It's not even a river, it's a strait, but this is from the Main Street, which is the Onondaga Escarpment, goes over to Canada. It's where the Niagara River starts falling. That we have to take a 21st century bicentennial planning approach as far as the zoning and permitting. And a part of that has to do with, and what you mentioned as far as the sharing the information with the town of Cheektowaga, Lancaster, and Clarence, as far as the benefits of relocating the toll barrier, that the town board approved the plan for relocating the toll barrier in 1969. Now here we are in 2016, and that's going to be a part of this project.
Mr. Frank, your comments are well taken, and there's a lot of issues that you're bringing up here. What I suggest you do is give us a call at the planning department, and we'll sit down and discuss all those issues and make sure that the consultant receives all that information. I really appreciate you being here and you providing those comments.
Well, it's nice because as far as the relicensing of the power project, as far as the watershed that's affected, they convert the water in Ellicott Creek to electricity. And the thing is, they gave $2 million for the sewage that's in Delaware Park for Skagit-Quatta Creek, that we're next, and it's going to go into this project, that you're going to be the co-lead agency with the village of Williamsville.
Good. Mr. Frank, thank you so much for your comments.
You're welcome. It's an honor and a privilege.
Would anybody else like to speak?
Very briefly, again, I would like to reiterate what the other gentleman said. It was a very excellent presentation that you did. One concern that I do have, and this partially reflects the meeting yesterday, is that there was a lot of emphasis put on the village of Williamsville, and I really believe, and even tonight, there was a fair amount of emphasis put on the village of Williamsville, and this is the Amherst Comprehensive Plan, and I would like to hear more being said about the town of Amherst. It's a huge area, and getting away from this particular section, Snyder, Eggertsville, Williamsville, we need to be talking about, which I'm sure will happen in the future, about the big area. I was a little bit concerned yesterday that the whole conversation basically revolved around Williamsville, which I thought was a little unfortunate. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak, comment, question? Good. Lee, anything to add? All right. I did want to make sure that I had one other introduction before we leave for this evening, before we adjourn. I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to meet Dal Giuliani, who's going to be the chair of the working committee, sort of a key role in this whole process. And Dal is a member of the planning board and was appointed by the chair as the chairman of this special committee. Again, thank you so much for showing up this evening, and I would encourage you all to take a look at that website and make sure you identify all the opportunities that you're going to have and to participate in this. We're looking forward to a very successful conclusion to this study. Thank you again.